Okay, our final part for this episode today. This is going to be on section 101 and the remaining items that we get out of 1833. So big years. Like I said, 1830, 31, 32, 33. We've only been living in that moment, and there's a lot in there. All right, so getting into this, we're going to talk about section 101. So the earliest copy we get of the 101st section is in Revelation Book 2. Again, the handwriting of Frederick G. Williams. Very few corrections, but we get one addition from Oliver Cowdery's hand. And I'll just read the whole statement here. It says, "Until the day cometh when there is found no," and then it says, the new stuff says, "and then I have other places which I will appoint unto them." And he says, more room for them, etc. and so forth. So that "I have other places which I will appoint unto them" is a bit of a comfort here, because it's like maybe we don't just have to live in independence. We can kind of branch out and move around like they are in Kirtland. So anyway, that's from Oliver Cowdery. Revelation Book 1 is in the handwriting of John Whitmer. Not a whole lot of corrections there either. We do get a broadsheet with some writing on the back of it. But this is, basically a printed page that we get of this Revelation. We also get a copy in Mormonism Unveiled, which has a very interesting introduction to it, which we will read in the sense of fairness to fill in the history, but that is the anti-Mormon volume that is written. It is section 97 in the 1835 Doctrine and Covenants. We also get one here in George Burkett's journal, which is written in his own hand. So he has a copy of this Revelation in his journal. It winds up in the Painesville Telegraph. Man, the Painesville Telegraph. And we also get a copy of this in the Manuscript History of the Church. So let's get to introductions here. Section 101 has no intro in Revelation Book 1, or in Revelation Book 2, excuse me. Revelation Book 1 does give an intro which says, Revelation given, Kirtland, December 16 and 17, 1833. There's also no introduction for the broadsheet. And Mormonism Unveiled gets kind of detailed here. So what I'd like to do is read that one off to you. Mormonism Unveiled does give us a fun introduction. And by fun, I mean anti-Mormon introduction. So just reading from Mormonism Unveiled, because it is an introduction to this revelation, it says this. After the conflict had subsided in Jackson County, 2 or 3 high priests repaired with all possible speed to the prophet in Kirtland, magnifying greatly the news that had taken place. These new, unexpected, and extraordinary circumstances must be met in an extraordinary manner. They were trying times, requiring the combined wisdom of the prophet and his head men in bringing out a revelation upon the subject which would admonish his dupes and strengthen their faith in the imposition, which had been so far shaken in many that they proposed selling their new, quote, eternal inheritance in Jackson County for a, quote, mess of pottage. But the prophet more readily discovered the new advantages that would ultimately accrue to his cause by a little perseverance. He well knew that the laws could not continue to be violated in our country for any length of time, and that he and his followers would, in the end, be the greatest gainers by the cry of persecution which they would raise, and by showing to the world in their ultimate triumph that the Lord was on their side and directed all their movements in putting their enemies to flight. The following was accordingly issued from their press in Kirtland in the form of a handbill. And then it says the revelation. Now, the handbill that they're talking about is the broadsheet. So that's how Mormonism Unveiled got a hold of it. And as you can see, the language is not exactly nice, but it is an introduction, and there is some truth to it. So thank you, Eber and Dr. Hurlbut. So that's what we get. Now, not much is given in Doctrine and Covenants, and we just get dates in George's journal that we talked about earlier. The Painesville Telegraph is also not very nice. So I'm going to read that one off to you as well. The Painesville Telegraph. Just can't get away from them. I love it. So here we go. It's called A Scrap of Mormonism. It will be recollected that an fray recently took place between the Mormon sect and a large body of the people of Jackson County, Missouri, and that peace was only restored by the removal of the former across the river into another county, by the advice of the lieutenant governor of that state, until the difficulties could undergo a judicial investigation. Soon after the above accounts were received at the headquarters of the Mormon prophet in this county, the following document, which they call a revelation, was printed and privately circulated among the deluded followers of the impostor Smith. It will be seen that it is made to touch the difficulties in question and settles them at once. The latter part of it may be better understood when it is known that some of the people who fled from Jackson County sold or attempted to sell their lands, that the Sidney G. spoken of as A.S. Gilbert, a merchant among them who actually sold out his store and goods. The deity is represented to be speaking throughout. We think the cloven foot is so visible in this document that some of the deluded will discover it. Cloven-footed. Didn't really discover that when I was reading it, but to each their own. So there you go. That's the Painesville Telegraph. Again, not the most positive way to start the Revelation, but there you go. We do get from the manuscript history some letters that were copied into here, and then we simply get, I received the following revelation given December 16, 1833. So that's all you get. So I have to say that the Latter-day Saint introductions pale in comparison to the anti-Mormon introductions, in terms of word count, at least. All right, so we get some wording changes between the modern section headings for this. In 1981, it says the saints were established in Van Buren County, and the people had lost household furniture, etc. Whereas in 2013, they added some things to it. It says the saints go to Van Buren, Lafayette, and Ray counties, and then they lost household furniture and so forth and so on. So just kind of an explanation of where they went is the difference. From the historical introduction, we get this. On the 16th through to the 17th of December of 1833, Joseph Smith dictated a revelation that addressed the November 1833 expulsion of church members from Jackson County, Missouri, and explained the steps they should take to regain their lands. So there you go. You may recall that they've been attacked, the press is destroyed, the leaders have been beaten up, and so further into the historical introduction, we get this. Joseph Smith counseled Missouri church members not sell 1 foot of land in Jackson County, stating that God would speedily deliver Zion. Therefore, church leaders in Missouri petitioned Governor Daniel Dunklin for protection while they pursued litigation against their assailants. After hearing of the Mormons' efforts to seek protection and prosecute their attackers, other residents believed that the church members were not planning to leave as expected. Non-Mormon settlers organized themselves and attacked the homes of members of the Church of Christ in late October and early November of 1833. A group of Mormons confronted their assailants on the 4th of November, killing 2 of them. But a militia consisting of many who were antagonistic to the members of the Church of Christ confiscated the Mormons' weapons within a few days. Most church members were driven from Jackson County. So apparently there was a fight back, and 2 of those people lost their lives. So we get a plead for help from Edward Partridge here. It says, understanding that Joseph Smith had counseled church leaders to retain their lands in Jackson County, Partridge declared that he did not want to sell, but quote, if we were to be driven about for years, I can see no use in keeping our possessions here, unquote. Facing these circumstances, Partridge requested, quote, wisdom and light from Joseph Smith on many subjects. So he's like, if we're just going to be running around, I don't know why we're keeping these lands, But there's not a lot of insight into why this was happening. So Joseph Smith also urged Partridge to use every lawful means in your power to seek redress for your grievances of your enemies and prosecute them to the extent of the law. Such means included petitioning judges, the governor, and the President of the United States for aid. 5 days later, Joseph Smith informed Missouri church leaders that the Lord was keeping hid from him the larger issues of how Zion would be redeemed, when such redemption would occur, and why God has suffered so great calamity to come upon Zion. The voice of the Lord would only say to him, quote, be still and know that I am God. Footnote 9 for this says, after the violence in Jackson County in July of 1833, Joseph Smith stated that such tribulations were not a surprise to him, and that he could, quote, tell all the whys and wherefores of the calamities. But the actual expulsion of church members from Jackson County was a different issue, as the expulsion jeopardized the establishment of the city of Zion and the gathering of the saints in Missouri. So there are sort of 2 things here. There was an acknowledgement that, like, Maybe you're getting beat up because you didn't, maybe keep the commandments like you should have, but being kicked out entirely is another issue. So I think it's interesting that that distinction is made. More from the historical introduction. This revelation featured here provided the direction that Joseph Smith and other church leaders sought. The revelation gave clear reasons for the ejection of Missouri church members from Jackson County, stating that they were expelled because of their transgressions. Yet the revelation also provided hope that the Lord would be merciful to the Missouri church members and that Zion would not be moved out of her place. It reiterated that church members were not to sell their lands in Jackson County and that they were to seek redress through the judicial system, the governor of Missouri, and the president of the United States. Through a parable of a nobleman in his vineyard, the revelation indicated how members of the church were to reclaim their lands by gathering up, quote, the strength of mine house, which are mine warriors, my young men, and they that are of middle age, and sending them to Zion to redeem it. In addition, branches of the church outside of Missouri were to continue to raise money for land purchases and to gather to the area, thereby strengthening the church's membership in Zion. And what I love is that they also kind of did this over breakfast. So some details here again from the historical intro. Details behind the immediate circumstances of the revelation are scant. According to a later account from Ira Ames, a church member living in Kirtland at the time, the revelation came to Joseph Smith and Oliver Cowdery over the course of one night. Ames explained that he and Martin Harris went to Joseph Smith's house in Kirtland early one December morning and, quote, found Joseph and Oliver Cowdery at breakfast. Cowdery greeted the two by saying, "Good morning, brethren. We have just received news from heaven." That news was the revelation featured here, the manuscript copy of which was lying on the table. So, hey guys, we got news. Let's have breakfast. All right. And we also get from this the beginning of Zion's camp, or what they called the Camp of Israel at the time. We get this. Church leaders also included the revelation in a petition they sent to Missouri Governor Daniel Dunklin, and they planned to send it with a petition to President Andrew Jackson, although it is unclear whether the revelation was ever sent to the president. In February of 1834, Joseph Smith began implementing the revelation's instructions to gather up the strength of the Lord's house, declaring that he, quote, was going to Zion to assist in redeeming it, and requesting volunteers to go with him. For the next several weeks, Joseph Smith and others recruited participants for what was called the Camp of Israel, and in May of 1834, the expedition started for Missouri. And that's a major event in church history, but we'll get to that in a few episodes from now. Footnote 17 for this says, Missouri leaders sent a petition to President Jackson in April of 1834 and enclosed a handbill with it. But the handbill appears to have been a recitation of the attacks in Missouri that had been published as an extra of the Evening and Morning Star in February of 1834. Neither the petition from Kirtland to Governor Dunklin nor the possible petition from Kirtland to President Andrew Jackson is extant. So maybe they didn't, maybe they didn't. All right. Some content footnotes from this is kind of a long section. Not too many footnotes from here, but it says in the text, I, the Lord, have suffered the affliction to come upon them wherewith they have been afflicted in consequence of their transgressions. Yet I will own them, and they shall be mine, in that day when I shall come to make up my jewels. Therefore they must needs be chastened and tried, even as Abraham, who was commanded to offer up his only son, for all those who would not endure chastening but deny me cannot be sanctified. Footnote 4 for this says, kind of a powerful statement. In August of 1833, Joseph Smith told William W. Phelps, John Whitmer, and Edward Partridge, Isaac Morley, John Corliss, Sidney Gilbert, that, quote, the affliction of my brethren reminds me of Abraham offering up Isaac, his only son. But my brethren have been called to give up even more than this, their wives and their children, yea, and their own life also, unquote. Kind of an intense statement there. Revelation also states, they that have been scattered shall be gathered, and they who have mourned shall be comforted. And they who have been given their lives for my name shall be crowned. Therefore let your hearts be comforted concerning Zion, for all flesh is in mine hands. Be still and know that I am God. Footnote 12 for this says, those who were appointed to gather to Missouri were previously told that those, quote, that die shall rest from all their labors and receive a crown in the mansions of my Father." Unquote. The Revelation text further gives to us, "And behold, the watchman upon the tower would have seen the enemy while he was yet afar off, and then you could have made ready and kept the enemy from breaking down the hedge thereof, and saved my vineyard from the hands of the destroyer. And the Lord of the vineyard said unto one of his servants, Go and gather together the residue of my servants, and take all the strength of mine house, which are my warriors, my young men, and they that are of middle age, also among all my servants who are the strength of mine house, save thee only, whom I have appointed to tarry, and go ye straightway unto the Lord of my vineyard, and redeem my vineyard." Footnote 43 for this says, a February 1834 revelation identified Joseph Smith as the servant to whom the Lord of the vineyard spoke. And therefore, I would say, is the justification for leading a camp of Zion to go redeem Independence, Missouri. All right, further into the text we get, "Now verily I say unto you, let all the churches gather together all their monies. Let these things be done in their time, lo, not in haste, and observe to have all things prepared before you. And let honorable men be appointed, even wise men, and send them to purchase the lands, and every church in the eastern countries, when they are built up, if they will hearken unto the counsel, they may buy lands, and gather together upon them. And in this way they may establish Zion. There is even now already enough in store, a sufficient, yea, even abundance, to redeem Zion." Footnote 52 for this says, "Nearly a year later, members of the church in Essex County, New York, sent, quote, wise men to Kirtland with $848.40 in cash and property for the purpose of purchasing land in Jackson County or counties roundabout for the inheritance of the church." So there's your big bucks, $848.40, which back then actually bought you something. Now it might buy you a watch if you're lucky. But anyway, we get the parable of the importunate widow, and this is actually kind of a favorite of mine. I just find this to be a very interesting story. In fact, Truman G. Madsen gives a kind of an entertaining interpretation of this, but we'll get to that in a second. So the Revelation says this, "Now unto what shall I liken the children of Zion? I will liken them unto the parable of the woman and the unjust judge. For men ought to pray always, and not faint. Which saith, There was in a city a judge which feared not God, neither regarded man. And there was a widow in that city. And she came unto him, saying, Avenge me of mine adversary. And he would not for a while. But afterward he said within himself, Though I fear not God, nor regard man, yet because this widow troubleth me, I will avenge her, lest by her continual coming she weary me." And Truman G. Madsen says, all right, just give her what she wants and get her out of here. Like, shut her up. I'm just going to give you stuff just to shut you up. And the idea is that, look, the Lord's not going to treat you that way, so weary the Lord. And so footnote 55 for this we get. In this 10th of December letter, Joseph Smith counseled church leaders in Missouri to weary God with their importunings as the poor woman, the unjust judge. So apparently that's just what you're supposed to do. Just keep at it until you get what you're asking for. They're also instructed to go after the judge and then the governor and then the president. And if after all that fails, then God's going to come out of his hiding place and make all that happen, which is what they try to do. They sent letters to all of these. And they all failed. In fact, there's the famous "I can do nothing for you," sort of thing that we get later on. This is a different congressman that has that unfortunate infamy. Footnote 59 for this says, in April of 1834, the Missouri Saints sent a petition to the United States President Andrew Jackson and stated that they sent it, quote, according to the direction of the Lord. They also sent this same petition to United States Senator Thomas Hart Benton of Missouri. The petition requested the help of federal troops to regain their Mormons' lands in Jackson County, and then asked that troops maintain peace after their reinstatement. Secretary of War Lewis Cass responded to the petition sent to Jackson, stating that the president did not have the right to send troops into Missouri and to aid in the enforcement of state laws. Which, it's 2025, so if you know anything about what's going on in the world today, this is still an argument being had. All right, the very last thing we get, or close to the end here, it says, I say unto you, it is contrary to my commandment and my will that my servant Algernon Sidney Gilbert should sell my storehouse, which I have appointed unto my people, into the hands of mine enemies, Let not that which I have appointed be polluted by mine enemies. Footnote 65 for this says, a July 1831 revelation instructed Sidney Gilbert to establish a store in Missouri. He did so in 1832. First, in an addition to the former log courthouse in Independence, and then after November of 1832, in a building on the northwest corner of the intersection between Lexington and Liberty Streets in Independence. On the 1st of November, 1833, Jackson County assailants broke into the store and scattered its goods in the street. They also tore down a part of Gilbert's residence. So that's that revelation. Let's finish up 1833, shall we? So we get a letter to the church that is said, quote, not after December 18th of 1833. So, whatever that means. Historical introduction says this. The letter was sent from the elders in Kirtland, including Joseph Smith. Publishing an open letter to the church's newspaper appears to have been a common way for church leaders in both Kirtland and Missouri to convey instructions to the entire Church of Christ. The letter featured here offered advice on preaching, advising missionaries to be tactful and patient, and reiterating their duty to, quote, bring about the glorious millennium by warning the world to repent and come to Christ. This letter also briefly discussed a variety of other topics, including the need to ordain qualified men to the priesthood and persecution. The letter's mention of the sore trial of the church may have referred to the recent violence against church members in Missouri. So where does this lead to? Well, we get this historical introduction. 2 months after publishing this letter, Kirtland leaders published another letter entitled The Elders of the Church in Kirtland to Their Brethren Abroad, which ran serially through 2 additional issues of the Star before the leadership laid the newspaper aside and left in the spring of 1834 with the Camp of Israel to aid church members in Missouri. So they put aside printing and all of it and said, we're on our way. We're going to go to Missouri. The last thing that we get is on the 26th of December. This is the minutes of a meeting, and it's pretty short, and it's, again, got some drama here. The text reads this. This day at evening, a bishop's court was called to take into consideration the case of Brother Ezekiel Ryder, an elder of the church, who had said many hard things against Brother Whitney, the bishop of the church. He said that Brother Whitney was not fit for a bishop, and that he treated the brethren who came into the store with disrespect that was overbearing, and fain would walk on the necks of the brethren, etc. Brother Story was also in a similar transgression. They were both rebuked sharply by Brother Sidney Rigdon and Brother Joseph, who told them that this church must feel the wrath of God except they repent of their sins, cast away their murmurings and complainings one of another, etc., etc. Brother Ryder and Brother Story confessed their wrongs, and all forgave one another, and closed by praying to the Lord for his blessing to rest upon us. Kirtland, December 26, 1833, Orson Hyde, clerk. And there you have it. 1833 is now over. We've had a lot of persecutions. We've had a lot of nasty stuff, but we also get introduced to Alexander Doniphan, who's a very great man. And hopefully what I've shown you is kind of the ambition of the early church members of building cities, building temples, building community buildings, and really constructing a plat of a city that made a lot of sense for them. If you don't know the end of this, these things don't really end well per se, but it's good to see how all of it kind of came together. So I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Filling in the History. We will see you next week. And until then, once again, I will say your life is worth remembering. So keep a journal. You never know if somebody's going to podcast about you one day. Have a good week.